Mm. Okay, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to How to Successfully Manage a Communications Crisis with Confidence and Purpose. My name is Keith Marnock, and I'm really grateful that you've decided to take some time this evening to take in this workshop. I know that some people were interested in being with us last week at this time on Tuesday and Wednesday. We're going to present very similar presentation this evening, and I hope that again it delivers value to you no matter where you're coming from. What I'm going to be doing is going through a set of slides and a couple of scenarios, basically 4 areas that relate directly to crisis communication and how I've dealt with it through my career. And at the end of the presentation, probably 35-40 minutes in, I'm going to be willing to take questions through comments on the various streams that we're on. We're on both Facebook and YouTube this evening. If you're tuning in, again, thanks very much for doing so. And yeah, I hope again that you find some value in tuning in. Yeah, so let's get started. So, well, I can get started. Here we go. There we go. All right. So again, thank you very much for joining us. And you might be asking yourself, what is it that you're going to get out of tonight's broadcast, tonight's presentation? Well, what I'm hoping is that, as the slide says, that I'm going to show you the in-demand skills and strategies to master the crucial competency of crisis management to become a valued or more valued communications professional and immediately enhance your career prospects within your current role or perhaps initiate your next career opportunity. If you stick around with me till the end of the presentation, which I hope you will, there's going to be an extra bonus for you, something that I'd like to share with you, a couple of items actually that will help enhance what you learned here tonight, and hopefully that you can take away and put to good use right away. It'd probably be a good idea if you turned off your phones or at least the notifications and anything else that's out there to distract you. This makes a lot more sense if you're able to observe it as we go. So I'm hoping that the people who are on this call are communicators, maybe in an organization, maybe you're on your own, maybe you've got your own practice, maybe you're someone who relies on communicators, or someone maybe that you're just you're interested in being that way. So when I think of communicators, I think of people who are real news and current affairs junkies, people who are constantly following the news, always know what's going on so that they can turn around and be better prepared to react to things that might be coming their way. They're often the people who are watching the news every day just to understand what other people are going through. You know, could I have survived what another organization struggled with today? If what happened to others today could just as easily be a crisis for me tomorrow. So I get you. I feel you. If you're in that boat, I certainly connect with you. You're in the right place if you want to enhance your communications toolkit because you're looking to advance your career. I really believe that being better or being really solid when it comes to crisis communication is a huge thing. You're also in the right place if you're wanting to avoid that sinking feeling that comes with not knowing what to do or how to react in the early stages of a developing crisis. And again, you might be an organizational leader who depends upon or works closely with your communications team, and you might in the end be someone who needs to become the voice of a crisis on behalf of your organization. Understanding what goes into responding in a crisis situation, that can be very valuable, and something that if you can relate to before you're in a crisis situation, the better off you'll be. To me, it doesn't really matter how or why you've come. Whatever your motivation is to be here tonight, again, I really want to concentrate on bringing some value, and I fully support you being here. And again, there'll be plenty of opportunity to follow up either live this evening or after the fact, and I'd be happy to do so with anyone. That's what this whole thing is all about. So from the pictures, I went from being a young idealistic and someone with hair, actually. I graduated from Ryerson Journalism School a long time ago, and was really fortunate to have a number of postings on television. I was a radio news editor, and really, for a number of years, got the hang of what news was really all about and had fun time sort of being in the media. But not too long after that, I progressed to being someone who was a communicator and sort of recognized my skills as being more communication based, and being able to bring more value to some of Canada's most recognizable brands. So I've worked in both the public and private sectors in Canada, most recently in the higher ed sector, 14 years spread between two universities in Canada, York University in Toronto and Western University in London. So why am I so excited to share what I'm going to share tonight? Well, it's something that I think can help people who are new to the industry, people who are wanting to, again, enhance or improve upon the skills that they may have already gathered. And I think that, yes, you can take courses, which I certainly fully endorse, but part of that is actually living through crises or tough situations when it comes to crisis communication. So I do have 30 years of corporate communication experience. I've been teaching crisis communication specifically to hundreds of people over the last 6 years in various group and smaller settings. And I think that, again, I'm looking for more opportunities to get the word out there. And I like to get into discussions and interactions and build communities around supporting people who are in these jobs, because the landscape's always changing. Applying principles and know-how and hacks or workarounds or secrets into what's going on, that's what I like to share, having been through it. I certainly know what a crisis is about. I've lived through them. I understand the ups and downs of it, the emotional toll that they can take, and what works best in terms of trying to deal with them and to respond to them. So I want to ask you, can you imagine what it would feel like to eliminate stress and confusion when the heat is on by adding crisis competency to your communications toolkit? If you're a communicator, if you work in the industry, I think you know what it feels like to be in a crisis. You're here for one reason or the other in terms of wanting to gain more information or a better sense of what's going on. So throughout the evening, I just want you to think about that. And certainly if there's questions or particular instances that you want to maybe address or ask of me, again, tonight or as follow-up, I'd be happy to address them. That's really what this is all about, trying to weed out the things that are really bothering you, the things that need your attention, and that we can hopefully address in tonight's presentation. Again, I think that being able to deal with crises is something that can really distinguish you among other colleagues. If you're in a small team and a large team, when you're able to be cool, and that cool comes from understanding what you need to be doing in a crisis, that can be a real game changer for you and your career. It can also mean a lot more to your organization if you're able to guide and lead and bring great value when your organization is under the most stress or under a spotlight of scrutiny. So here's what we're going to do. Where are we going with this? We're going to start with talking about the plan, planning for crises, and understanding how and why it's important to be ahead of the game before crises ends up on your doorstep. We're going to talk about the media and developing relationships with them, both as a channel to get your message out, but also the challenge it can be to deal with the media in crises. We're going to talk about the message, how you get your message cobbled together, the kinds of things that you need to do to really distinguish your message, to not cause you extra problems when you're probably already in a tight situation. And we're going to talk about the people who deliver those messages. So talking about the traits and the approaches that spokespeople need to be thinking about and the approaches that they need to be taking when they find themselves in a crisis, speaking really specifically around authenticity and transparency and why those attributes are important. I'm going to talk to you about the opportunity that I have online for you in terms of going beyond what we talk about tonight, both in terms of building a community and also information that I can be sharing with you on an ongoing basis. And then at the end of this presentation, I do want to be able to take questions and answers from you. I am riding this ship, I will tell you, on my own tonight. So we are operating on 3 platforms. And so, again, if you've got questions, please type them into the comments area. And I would be happy to try to cobble those together and answer them within this live broadcast. However, if we don't get to them for whatever reason, technical or otherwise tonight, I certainly promise to get back to you and certainly will hopefully be able to share whatever you're bringing back in terms of feedback, questions, or insights with this group as we continue to try to build this community to deal with corporate communication and specifically in this iteration, crisis communication. So if that's all good with everyone, why don't we get started? So start with definition. What is a crisis? Well, a crisis is a crucial turning point in the progress of an issue or bad news, or a series of events that threatens the routine operations and, more importantly, the public credibility and or reputation of your organization. Again, if you've been in communication for any period of time, you'll have a sense of this. I'll be interested to know whether or not what we talk about tonight is a part of what you've done to prepare for a crisis. So the first thing we need to deal with is understanding when we are in a crisis and what's the difference between sort of a bad day and a crisis that's actually occurring and needs to be dealt with. So the difference between a crisis and an issue, again, there's many different definitions, but as related in this particular photograph or image, here's a boat that's definitely experiencing an issue, a large ship at sea. In a bad circumstance. There's no question that there's things that this ship is having to deal with beyond normal operations. But the reality is that the ship's captain or those who are operating the ship still have options. They still have a choice. They have time, perhaps. They can, change course. They can try to get out of the way of the rough seas. They can try to navigate around them. Right now, they're in a bad situation, but the reality is that they still have options. Move to and add this graphic to the screen of the famous ship, the Titanic. And this is about as graphically appropriate as I can get in terms of comparing an issue to a crisis. And so when you're on the Titanic, you've got yourself a crisis because nothing else really matters. Your options are very few. What needs to happen is very obvious, and all hands, pardon the pun, are on deck dealing with the one and only issue. So if you are in a situation where you're under scrutiny, under critique or attack, frankly, by either the media or people who are stakeholders or have interests in your organization, you know what this is about. And so when you find that everyone in your communications area, as well as your senior leadership, is dealing with one problem, you are likely in a crisis. And that's important because there is a certain protocol or there's certain measures that you take when you find yourself in a crisis, and you need to know when that has arrived. So again, if you've been in one, you know what it feels like. But again, once you are in one, you and everyone around you needs to understand that the mode has changed, that your day-to-day operation has changed, and that you need to be working on dealing with the crises. So the first thing that we always talk about when we're examining or considering crises is having a plan. And frankly, having a plan can alleviate so much stress. It can add so much confidence to what's going on if it's well laid out and established beforehand. So again, the plan is our first key, making sure that you understand the various phases of crises and what you can do against them. In essence, there are two phases of a crisis. One is the pre-crisis, before a crisis is actually struck, and then the in-crisis and the wrap-up of a crisis situation. So what I would argue and what most people would agree is that most crises are actually preventable. If you know that there's something that you or your organization is having difficulty with that might bring reputational harm to your organization, it should be dealt with. It should be dealt with through the operations and leadership of your organization. If you know that it's something that's difficult to deal with or change, you as a communicator are really responsible for coming up for the reasoning and the messaging around why that is the case. We go with the 80-20 rule here for sure. 80% of what might turn up as a crisis for you is probably something that you can identify for your organization. And if that's the case, then you need to be dealing with that immediately. So again, preparation and prevention really are able to take such a large chunk of concern out of the way if you can really realistically identify the concerns, the problems, the potential downfalls that your organizations may face, and plan against those. In crisis, we're talking about managing how people perceive the crises, what they know about it, what you know about it, what you can share, and how sharing of information can actually mitigate what's actually going on and how badly your organization will be affected. And one of the big keys that many people perhaps write down, have in their plans, but maybe don't always execute on is the rebuild and the renew. And that comes from having a debrief session after you had a crisis as quickly as possible after a crisis. And that can often mean getting a lot of people in the same room in a large space. Because if in fact your organization is really concerned with this one and only issue, the larger the organization, the more people who have probably been involved. But it is crucial to try to get that group of people together as soon after as possible. Run through a chronology of what happened, let all factors and all units speak up and have their say about things that worked well and things that did not work well. The things that don't work well, especially from a communications point of view, need to be noted immediately. And all of your plans, whether specific or broadly, need to be updated to reflect that, to remove those kinds of problems happening again. Because the reality is that the next crisis could hit at any time at all. Here's a graphic around the pre and the in crisis situation. So we're talking about being prepared and being preventative on the right-hand side of what is basically this this clock-like graphic. So again, right now you're trying to identify all the things that you know are going to be contentious, things that people might not be able to understand of your organization, and things that despite best efforts of your organization need to be explained and perhaps defended. You're always wondering about how you're going to hear about things that are going awry. Again, you may have identified these situations, but again, the size of your organization may require you as a communicator to keep an eye or an ear on what's going on in your organization, knowing that particular areas are sensitive. You need to be able to monitor either through connections with leaders, social media shares, internal updates, or whatever. Keep an eye on when you know that or when you believe that something that's threatening to your organization may actually bubble up and have some sort of a need to act on. We're talking about issue and risk management when we're talking about prevention. So again, the whole idea around putting a plan together is so very important. Knowing what's going to happen once you find yourself in that situation, again, is really important. The definition around a crisis, and the reason why you need to figure out what a crisis really means to you and your organization, is when do you throw the switch? When does everyone who needs to know understand that you are in a crisis situation? Because up until then, you may be operating on your own, either as an individual or as your communications group, without a lot of support or knowledge from other groups within your organization. And it's really, really important that especially senior leadership, and then perhaps more specifically units that are involved with a particular issue, are aware that you've gone into a crisis mode. That should signal to those people that they need to be available to you to help you understand and piece together the information that's going to allow you to defend and talk about this. Because no matter what's happening, you are going to have to communicate this. The reality is that in most situations, organizations are also going to have to operationally figure out crises. If it's not some sort of a commentary or what I would say like a social media type situation or crises, if it's more operational and physical or an emergency situation, often there's other things that need to be going on at the same time. That said, those who are dealing with the operations need to understand the value of communication because that's going to help them get through the situation as well. So understanding the management, how you're going to divide up roles, what roles you need to be assigned to, having people in place knowing that once a crisis hits that they're going to be having a role of their own. This is really important. And then the post-crisis issues. Are the impacts ongoing? Are you going to have to actually change parts of your operation? Can you say that you're going to change parts of your operation so a crisis like this doesn't happen again? Again, anything that you can find that we're in the lessons learned column, this is the time soon after a crisis ends for you to be able to put that back into play. So again, I want to reiterate that 80%, at least 80%, of what might come your way is probably well within your imagination at the least, if not already accounted for. But these are the situations and the scenarios that you need to be dealing with. You need to have a plan, an approach for when these kinds of things happen. The more information, the more approval of what you're going to say, the more of understanding who or what might be talking on such a situation saves time, and that allows you to be able to spend more time strategizing and understanding how you're going to roll out a communications response. Again, 4 to 5 crises are ready to go now. You need to be prepared now or be preparing. And we talk about plans, but the reality is that you really need to understand the process. So you may have a small communications group or perhaps a larger one. The reality is that these plans, these communication plans, if you haven't seen them before, they need to be physical. They need to be printed off. They need to be hard copy, as well as being electronic. Electronic is nice, but you can never understand what the situation might be where you can't access something electronically. These plans need to be available to people, and they really need to be realistic and process oriented. So it's one thing to have a plan. It's more important to have a process so that those who are available on site on a particular day know what has to happen. They know the roles that are crucial to a communications response. And the only way that you can really do that is to practice. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But a plan is one thing, but if it's the first time you're ever looking at the plan, it's not really going to be too much use to you. A process. What is the process when you understand you're in a crisis? What are the first things you need to do? Who are the people that you need to bring in, and what are the roles and what are the steps that you need to be taking and covering off to make sure that you are being thorough in your response? Because I think, again, as I mentioned off the top, the way that you respond to a crisis can be as crucial, if not more so, than often the crisis itself. It's an opportunity for your organization to shine. If you stumble, it can make what people are believing is not a good situation even worse. So whether you've seen or felt or held in your hand a crisis communications plan or not, these are the elements that you need to be thinking about and should be a part of any plan that you're putting forward. A statement of who you are, and that might sound a little strange off the top, but what are the values of your company? Is your company based upon safety? Is it based upon caring? Is it based upon knowledge? Is it based upon sharing? What are the things that speak to your organization's culture? The reason why I say this is because if this is a serious situation and your top people are eventually brought forward to talk about how and why you dealt with the situation in the way that you did, it should be in line with the values of your company. Safety, people, all those kinds of things. Where do they fit into the way that you responded to something that was very threatening to you in this particular situation? Of course, you want to always, you're going to have separate plans for separate scenarios. So you need to outline the issue, the background that might need to be at hand easily when you're doing these things, and also come up with a way to judge the severity of what's going on. Depending upon what's happening, how severe is this crisis? Is it super reputational damaging? Is it bound to go on for a long period of time? There's a number of elements that you need to think about, but you need to understand basically on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 how severe this is, and make other people who are responding with you aware of how severe it is. We're going to talk about the crisis team makeup. In the plan, you should have a list of the kinds of people that need to be available when the crisis hits. We're going to talk more about spokespeople in a moment, but that person needs to be identified. Key messages that you can put together now are super valuable, mostly because you're going to want to have those messages approved, that your senior leaders, those who are in charge of the direction of the company, who have charge over the purse strings and the finances and the ability to operate in a crisis. If you've got some of those pre-approved that are already signed off on, that can save you all kinds of time. And time really is crucial when a crisis hits. You want to be as agile and as responsive as you can be. Again, this is a super step forward in terms of saving time. If you already know how or have a sense of what you're basically going to say about something, certainly in the initial stages, that can be super valuable. Understanding who you need to be talking to, and often the one audience that is forgotten but is most crucial and should be a priority if at all possible, is your internal audience. Again, depending upon the size of your organization, you want to find a way to try to communicate what's going on to your people before they hear it from somebody else. Especially if this is bad news, you do not want to be seen as if you've been hiding something from your own people. It makes things much worse. Also, if you do share with certain people within your organization, there may be people who you unknowingly can count on to help you with the situation, who may come forward and be able to identify and give you insights that you were not otherwise available to. So strategies and action, what are you going to do when this hits? Again, depending upon what the situation is, it'll be different. And then the evaluation and assessment, not only of the communication, but around the whole response, how you were able to get back to a sense of normalcy, get out of the crises. What did it take to get there? And how well did you do in getting there? The people who are part of your crisis makeup can vary. Again, can be more people than this, but these are the crucial elements of it. And it can be, if you're in a small shop, maybe 1 or 2 people dealing with all of this. Ideally, having an individual at each of these posts would be fantastic. So you need to have someone who's overseeing the entire response, seeing what's going out, being the approver of the messages. They may have to go up the scale, but they need to have sense that what you've gathered from an information point of view and what you're saying about it makes sense. Information gatherer, this needs to be basically someone who's a reporter. If it's a physical emergency on your premises, that person may have to go out and be on scene somewhere. If it's a fire or if there's been an accident, they need to go and get the information. You need to really be wary about getting information from other people and using that as the basis for what you're communicating. Wherever possible, you're looking for primary source information. Also, you need a writer, someone who is able to piece together the information that you do compile, and it sometimes may come from different sources, but you need to have one person basically be the conduit between the information and coming up with things that are written. This person should be able to write long and short prose and understand that what's going to be written or used on different platforms will vary in size and scope and needs to be easily editable. Social media is really important. These days, social media is often where you find out about crises. When you are under the scrutiny of a crisis, your social media person or designate or coordinator is someone who's going to be very important, because they're going to be able to read the mood of what's going on and understand how severe it is. We talked about that before. That's not to say that if that person believes something's a big problem, that it changes your approach. Again, this is the part where you try to come up with a strategy beforehand. 3 or 4 people talking about an issue is not necessarily a crisis, but it can feel like it sometimes. And so you need to have a better perspective than simply social media to understand what the scope of the crisis is. Again, you need your spokesperson at the ready. Media monitoring. This happens after you've put out communication on your crises. You need to hear what the media is saying, what their filter has looked like, and are they saying anything that's inaccurate, most importantly. If there's any inaccuracies or false statements, you need to follow up with them really quickly. In this day and age, commentary can often be taken as facts. And if comments or what's being said or paraphrased about something is taken in a certain way, it can be repeated and suddenly can become a fact. You need to watch really carefully, especially after you send out your first notification around a crisis, to make sure that it's accurate. Here are the holding statements, the kinds of holding statements in the story that you need to tell. Where are we at with the situation? The fact that you're trying to gather the best information. Sometimes you're trying to inform people. So in a tragic situation where people may have been badly harmed or God forbid, fatally wounded, often you're going to have to be involved with HR or other people to be in contact with people's loved ones or family if they've been seriously injured, and that can take time. Again, you don't want people of that nature to be finding out about these things through the media. You want to be reaching out to those people directly, and that's why you'll see often in scenarios where some sort of tragedy has happened with people, it's difficult to get quick reaction on what's going on in details, because that step always has to be taken. You need to express the fact that you're working on resolving what's going on, identifying what's happening, and if there's at all a possibility of stopping this from happening again in the future, that you're working towards that being the case. Those are all statements that you can have ready again, and that will save you all kinds of time. The reality is that when something's going wrong, you can save yourself a lot of time and a lot of heartache if you simply acknowledge what's going on, either through internal channels and or through social media posts and channels. Letting people know that is going to save you a lot of time and take away confusion and swamping your channels in terms of people reaching out to you. There's no end to people who want to tell you or believe that they're the first ones to tell you about what's going on when something's happening in an obvious way. Does your plan allow for speedy information gathering? Do you have a plan in place, or the people in place who know how to get the information from the various places in your organization quickly? Because speed and agility really do matter. You're trying to be out there to talk about this as soon as you've got something put together that's cogent and ready to be shared, to let people know what's going on, if only to buy you some time before you get more detail. Written approved templates, we talked about that. Directives on how you go about and deciding how you're going to communicate need to be a part of your plan. Can anybody execute this plan? Anyone at any time of the day? I'll tell you that most crises don't happen between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. during the daytime. Often after hours, early or more, late day situations, you cannot be caught off guard. And so if people are aware of the plan, they should know what their responsibilities are, no matter what time of day or night, if they are called upon. So again, the big takeaway on the plans is that, yes, have a plan, let people know about it, and in doing so, let them understand what the process is and what their part in the process can be, so that they are that they're able to mobilize and bring value as soon as they can. All right. Second key, dealing with the media and being professional with the media. Again, the media can be among your most valuable channels. It's one of the most effective ways to get your message out to people. The reality is that they are the ones who usually bring you your crises. A public situation where scrutiny beyond those who know anything about your organization hear a story and then make a decision around what's going on. You being able to deal with the media in an effective and professional way is important, obviously. But the reality is that the emotions that surround crises can often be quite heightened. And even people that you've dealt with before can be, in your mind, really pushy, asking for a lot. And so, again, having a plan, having thought through how you're going to respond to media when crises hit is a really, really important situation. You're able to take the emotion out of it, hopefully, to a degree, and understand what your role is in terms of dealing with a crisis. Media is a channel. It's a third-party channel. It differs from your own owned properties or platforms. It is a third-party viewer or critique of what's going on. What you need to know is that, again, dealing with media in a professional way is going to serve you well. And your website, your social media, your internal notifications really only get you so far. The true test of how well you're responding in a crisis really will be judged through the media, and what they report on, what they judge you about, or how they judge you on what's gone on, is so very important. And again, as communicators, you need to find ways of being seamless and professional and responsive. And I hesitate to use the word partner with, but be quite available and understand that the media is such an important channel in what's going on, that you need to have thought through how you're going to deal with it before it arrives. Because the reality is that if you don't talk, someone else will, and the media will find those people. And if they don't, they may have ideas of their own. You're not looking for solutions in the early stages of a crisis, but you do need to acknowledge what's going on, however vague. Again, we talked about perhaps something going on your premises or in your building somewhere. If it's obvious that something's going on, say so. That you're aware of something going on, that you're investigating it, that you're trying to get information, and that you're trying to get more information out. Again, ideally, if you can get this to an internal audience first, that's great. If it's becoming obvious that this is a public concern because of the inclusion of social media, that's another thing. But again, acknowledgement takes the temperature down quite a bit, and it sets up a situation where you are going to have to bring more information, but it's not going to have someone pounding on your door while you're trying to figure out what that is. Taking responsibility to various degrees is something that some places find hard to do. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're taking a legal step or committing to anything beyond that, but to do the opposite and not take responsibility, to deny that there's any connections or that you've got anything to worry about, frankly, in a very generic sense, is never going to serve you well. If it's less than what you're responsible for, that will become obvious over time, but it's always better to believe that if the common belief is that there is that you are a responsible party, that's what you need to follow on. So don't let people try to talk you out of that. You need to acknowledge what's going on and be as responsible and take as much responsibility as you can in the early going. Getting ahead of the story, that's sometimes a hard definition to get to. What I like to say is that the way that you get ahead of the story is that when you first are able to talk about it, that you give more information or more information than people are thinking about asking about. So you may have discovered, let's go back to the emergency situation, that that there was some sort of a fire or something. So a fire took place. Things got burnt, but people weren't hurt. It's kind of a situation. So what you want to do there is that you want to acknowledge that something happened, that you identified it, that you acknowledged it, that you went and dealt with it, and then you resolved it. And you resolved it to the point where you hopefully have identified something that you can do differently or change so that you won't have this again. So the questions might be around, well, what happened today? You can go a step beyond that and not get caught with questions that you didn't think about, because if you don't, then the story can be extended easily. If you're able to keep it to one story, or what we call the one news cycle, 24 hours of news or 36 hours of news, and not have any more follow-up or concerns, then you've contained the situation well, no matter what the issue or the circumstance or scenario might be. Getting ahead of the story basically means that you're not holding back things that you know about that are relative to this, and also that you're not being surprised by what might be asked. So again, trying to gather as much and good information as possible is really, really important. You should have ongoing existing positive relationships, both with people who are local, media that's local to you, as well as sector media that you may have dealt with. In a big crisis, you're often going to have to deal with media that you've never dealt with before. And so having a good approach to media, being timely, being helpful, resourceful, that's going to resonate with any media that you run into. And that is really the mindset that you need to be in. So again, acknowledge quickly, because the media is going to decide good or bad if that's an option, and also who is to blame if it's a bad thing, if it's a reputational consideration. And so acknowledge quickly, because that gets you into the conversation. You don't want to try to shy away from something that's obviously going to be asked of you. You want to set the stage where you're a part of the conversation from the start, not brought in after the story has basically been told and set up against you. And this is a big one. The media is not out to get you. I often hear that from people. It's just really not the essence of it. If it is, then they're probably not a very responsible organization. Media is a good thing. People who are less than media or traditional media, they may have more of an agenda. But traditional media, they want to tell a good story, and they want it through good, solid facts. And if you can offer those, then you're already starting to be a part of the solution here. The media are definitely in a competitive industry. They want to be ahead of their competition whenever possible. Breaking news. There's a reason why breaking news is highlighted in all platform or all traditional media platforms. They want to be seen as an organization or an outlet that is trusted, that gets the story right, but gets it to people quickly when they want to know about it. And so if you're helping with that, that's going to make your time, especially in a crisis situation, much better. Don't get your back up and push back. Try to figure out how to support and be a part of helping the media get their story out. So getting your story out, that's really based on key messages. And so that's key number 3, formulating good key messages. We talked about this before. So getting out in front of the story, getting out in front of what's going on, aiming for a single cycle story. Again, that is rooted in not only telling and answering or delivering messages that relate to people's most obvious curiosities, bringing greater value and not getting caught with situations where you're not anticipating questions. That's really what you're trying to aim for when it comes to key messages. Short, concise, pithy messages that resonate with people and make it look like you are in control of the situation, because you are. Make sure your messages reflect that. I often hear from people that say, well, I don't like talking to the media, especially in heated crisis situations, because I'll get misquoted and it'll make the story worse and so on. Well, I want you to take a look at this frame. And you could easily be asked 4, 5, 6 different questions on a particular story, especially in the heat of the moment by a reporter. If you have 4 or 5 or 6 answers, they might use any of what you give them. And even though, your answer A, your most important message, or your answer B, your next important message, might be the most important in your mind, it's not always seen that way when a reporter is asking about it. They may think that the more questions they ask, the better information is going to get over time. They may, for whatever reason, choose something that's more of an aside to you. And often that's what misquote looks like. Something that you didn't think was important, the media pounced on because you offered it to them. So if you take a look at this, and then you look at this slide, you go from 6 questions with 6 answers to 6 questions with maybe 2 answers. Finding different ways of delivering your key messages, or what we call bridging, if you're not getting asked the right questions, or bridging back to what you think is the most important thing, is actually the best way about delivering your message and telling your story. When you're asked questions by the media, you're not expected to give answers. I should probably change this slide to say message A, message B, not answer. But when you answer a question with your key message, you need to be focusing on the most important things that you want to impart. And if it's more than two things, they better be very, very important things. The reality is that in most news stories, be it radio, television, or newspapers, the opportunity for you to actually be quoted or have your message translated, there's very few opportunities. And you really don't want to waste the opportunity for you to be talking about your issue with less than your best material. So trying to find ways of continually talking about your key messages, however best you can do that, is really going to help you come up with a satisfying result. And perhaps the bonus round, they actually print one of your key messages almost verbatim. But think about that when you're worried about what the media report on you. They're willing to be fair. They're willing to take what you give them. If you give them more than what you want to give or what they need, you might not be happy with the result. So you need to be disciplined if you're a spokesperson. We're going to talk about that in a second. Sticking to your messages, working as a group to come up with the best messages that make the most sense and that you can act on. We talked about bridging. So bridging is around trying to, if you're not being asked the questions that you want, that you either rephrase or find a way to include or bridge or pivot to the messages that you're actually looking to deliver. Don't engage in speculation and never go down a road where there's unprepared responses being given. You may open up a whole new can of worms and you might be right back to your desk coming up with more messages. You just don't want to extend what's going on. Okay, so the messenger. We're talking about spokespeople here. So spokespeople can come in many different sizes and shapes. They could be you, or it could be you trying to prepare someone to deliver key messages, depending upon what your situation might be. When it comes to spokespeople, you really want to find someone who's willing to be disciplined, who is emotionally intelligent and can sort of read the room, I would say, and understand that you're really talking to audiences. You're not answering questions again. You're really trying to impart what your organization thinks about a situation and be able to demonstrate empathy if that's required, but be authentic and transparent and really try to tell people as best they can understand what's gone on from your perspective in a way that relates to them. You do not want to be simply putting out messages that make sense to you. You need to think about who will be receiving these messages, and it's rarely, if ever, the people who are asking the questions, journalists. They are going to take the story and deliver it to their broader audience. And so you want to think about what that audience is going to hear from you ultimately. And so having someone who is able to understand what's going on, but be authentic, someone who people can relate to and understand, someone who can speak on behalf of the organization truly, whether they're in charge of, again, the finances or the operations of the place, the higher up the rung in bad situations, the better. There are situations when you don't want to go too high up the rung, but that's a discussion for another day. Being disciplined and sticking to what you've planned, again, is really, really important. Having a natural conversational confidence so that it doesn't look like you're reading messages, that's something that comes with practice, something that, if you're lucky enough to have someone around to be able to pull off messaging as if it was just something that they were talking about, well, that's just like that's A++. But if you don't, the more important thing is to show context and to show empathy against what's happened and understand who's been ill-affected or harmed by what's gone on. Those are the people that you should prioritize when it comes to delivering messages. Okay, so I've got two quick little examples I want to show you here. I know that we're kind of going long on time. The first is this is the CEO of BP Oil. You may recall the Deepwater Horizon. It was an oil explosion that took place in the Gulf of Mexico. This is the CEO of BP who was commenting on it. And this is an example of how when messages aren't well delivered or well thought through or kind of done off the cuff, the kinds of things that can result. I'm hoping that you will hear the audio here.
Sunday, BP's CEO apologized.
We're sorry, actually. We're sorry for the massive disruption it's caused to their lives. And, we're There's no one who wants this thing over more than I do. You know, I'd like my life back.
Life here may never be the same. The water and all that lives in and around it could be harmed for years. So on this holiday weekend, some people in New Orleans protested.
We're trying to clean up this mess.
I'm filled with anxiety every night, and I hope that the BP executives feel the same way. Unfortunately, I doubt that they do.
All right, so that is an amazing example of
Sunday,
how, so you obviously heard the comment in there that Tony Hayward, the CEO of BP, wanted his life back in the middle of a crisis. So he was certainly not thinking about those who had been adversely affected or harmed by what had gone on. 11 people died on that oil rig. Basically, oil was gushing at hundreds of barrels a day for many weeks into the Gulf of Mexico. The damage to ecology and so on was massive. And all he could think about was his own life. In time, they got it better, but the problem was that one comment caused them a lot of grief and a lot of mopping up, pardon the pun, that really wasn't necessary if they thought through what they wanted to say and stuck to it in a disciplined way. A much better example would be Michael McCain here from Maple Leaf Foods here in Canada. You may recall the listeria outbreak that happened about 12 years ago. This is an example of a leader who decided pretty much on his own with a few advisors around him to put out a statement that was not very polished, but that was agile and quick when it really required it. And it went beyond what he said at the time was he didn't check with either the lawyers or the accountants on this. He just wanted to let people know what was going on and try to be as responsible as possible. It's a great now textbook example of the way that you can be authentic and transparent and how you can take down what's gone on in a bad situation. Just listen to what he said, not off the cuff, but in a rather quick, in a quick turnaround statement.
My name is Michael McCain. As you may know, listeria was found in some of our products. Even though listeria is a bacteria commonly found in many foods and in the environment, we work diligently to eliminate it. When listeria was discovered in the product, we launched immediate recalls to get it off the shelf. Then we shut the plant down. Tragically, our products have been linked to illnesses and loss of life. To Canadians who are ill and to the families who have lost loved ones, I offer my deepest sympathies. Words cannot begin to express our sadness for your pain. Maple Leaf Foods is 23,000 people who live in a culture of food safety. We have an unwavering commitment to keeping your food safe with standards well beyond regulatory requirements. But this week, our best efforts failed, and we are deeply sorry. This is the toughest situation we faced in 100 years as a company. We know this has shaken your confidence in us. I commit to you that our actions are guided by putting your interests first.
So that was ahead of its time in terms of coming out and basically admitting and taking responsibility like we talked about earlier on. But it didn't really cost the company. And over time, that response was viewed as, again, being exceptional in terms of having a leader come out and really relate to an issue so directly. 23 people died in that situation and across the country, and many of them were in long-term health centers, not unlike what we're finding in the early stages of the pandemic. But there was a lot of pressure on Maple Leaf to do good things. To do the right thing. They shut down a number of plants. They really put their operation pretty much on hold. And moving forward, they've made food safety an integral part of their values and their mission as a corporation. So anyhow, when I teach this, we go into much greater detail about all the good things that he said and the reasons why those really worked for Maple Leaf Food in that situation. If you have a chance to look at that sometime, I would advise that as definitely as a case study. So supporting spokespeople, you need to give people the heads up that they're going to be spokespeople. Ideally, you get them trained so they're not feeling like a ship out of water, just delivering messages out of nowhere. They need to understand what you're trying to accomplish, the context of your plan and what you're trying to do. Again, the emotional intelligence, understanding what the room feels like and what the expectation is for what the organization wants to say. That's really, really important. Again, you might be that person sometimes, but more often than not, you're prepping and trying to put people into that mindset. The reality is that spokespeople will often be more senior than you are. And so coming up with an understanding with those people, having a plan that they can look at ahead of time builds a lot of confidence. And when you're under pressure, it's very, very important that you have that kind of relationship with senior people, especially who are acting as spokespeople. I can tell you that pulling that off well can really raise your credibility and your notice within your own organization if you're able to deal with that in a good way with senior people, because often it's very large issues that they're trying to deal with that make a big difference to the organization as a whole. So again, we're back to, if you can think these things through and use some of these principles and these approaches to make your crisis response better, it may be very good for not only your organization but you as well. So the opportunity, last week I did 2 of these sessions, and I led to offering up an opportunity to join a training session that I had proposed to do. I have not had the uptake on that opportunity that I really wanted to. So this is me being authentic and transparent. I'm going to come back to that opportunity of training at the crisis level beyond what we've talked about today. This is all very not superficial, but at a very, very high level. And I love to dive into probably each one of these slides that we've talked about in greater detail. I do have an entire course that I've put together, but I'm not ready to release it at this point. What you're going to find is that on my social media accounts especially, I'm going to start sharing much of what I was going to be sharing in the early modules of that course. And I want to start to build a conversation and a community where we can talk about corporate communications and, in the near term, crisis communications. And perhaps, without having people sign up, that we get to a point where we're not just doing rudimentary crisis communication, but that we get to a critical mass when enough people really want to take the extra dive and look into training around crisis communication. I think that's when I'll come back to it. I think in the next number of months, I'm just going to share everything that I know about crisis communication as broadly as I can. And again, to try to get communication and conversations going about crisis communication. And so I'm excited about the next little while. I did say we've basically come to the end of the presentation. It's been a little bit longer than I had promised you, but I did say that if you'd stay to the end, I would send out a couple of things. So the crisis clinic is what I'd offered. I'm going to bring that back on an offer sometime probably late summer, early fall, depending upon how things are going. But basically, I've formulated a training course that dives deep into crisis communication and all of its elements. As a gift or as a thank you for you taking in the presentation tonight, I want to send you 2 PDF e-documents. One's called When the Media Calls, and this is basically just a checklist of something that, especially if you find yourself in a situation prepping someone who's not ready or that you've not dealt with before, or maybe not done any media before, this is a simple checklist that will get you into the right mindset to deal with crisis response with the media especially. And then my top 10 crisis principles, much of what my course that I'm putting together is based upon. It's just it's a checklist with a little bit of context around the principles that you need to be thinking about when you're engaging in crisis communication. So we'll be back with the crisis clinic at some point. I'm going to check and see if we've got any comments that have come in to follow up on. And what I'm thinking is that probably the best way to engage with me moving forward would be to communicate through some of my existing channels. It looks like we don't have any particular Q&A right now, but I invite you to visit my webpage that's devoted to communication, crisis comms, and communication and media training specifically. I invite you to listen to my podcast, which is in its early stages. I believe I've got 10 episodes out there, and knowing that I was going to be doing these workshops in these last few weeks, I've sort of suspended a few of those episodes. They're going to come in a bit more quick fashion, but basically we're going to work to the point where that podcast is coming out weekly on media and crisis situations. I know that I've got a couple people coming up in the next few days talking about the COVID rollout, the pandemic rollout, specifically around government and the communications that's involved with that. So I'm looking forward to letting people know about that. So if you're interested, you can sign up for my blog or otherwise send me your email address at info@keithmarnock.com. Again, I'm trying to build a bit of a community where I can include you on all the platforms that I'm engaged on. I want you to be a part of that community and part of the conversation. I can be reached at any of these platforms, including phone and text. That is my direct line there at the bottom, and more than happy to include you on that. This presentation has been taped, and it's going to be rebroadcast or available on my YouTube channel. Speaking of Media is the name of the YouTube channel, as well as the podcast, and it will be rebroadcast on and available on Facebook if you're showing up there. We do have a Facebook page called Speaking of Media as well, and I invite you to sign up and become a member of that. Another place where we're trying to get the corporate communication, crisis communication discussion going. I will say it's been growing slowly, but now that we've started to get some conversations and discussions going, I think there's some great value in there, and the connections and the networking that can go on with corporate communicators or people who have an interest in corporate communications, I think is really strong. So that is the end of my presentation. I really appreciate everyone who's taken the time to have joined in. If you've stayed till this point, I really appreciate. I give an extra degree of appreciation for you sticking in there. Again, this can be seen if you felt that there were any elements that you wanted to look at. Again, it will be available on my Speaking of Media YouTube channel, as well as my website, keithmarnock.com, and on Facebook at Speaking of Media. So until the next time we come up with one of these workshops, I thank you again for joining us, and hopefully this has been of value to you as you move forward with your crisis communications career. All the best.